Hello and welcome, everybody. My name is Martina Grom. I'm very happy to be here today at Global Azure Austria. It's a long-term relationship we have with the Global Azure Bootcamp and also the Global Azure Day within Microsoft 365 and out of Azure. And thank you that I'm able to speak today. So my name is Martina Grom. First of all, I just want to introduce myself, what I'm doing, and where do I come from. So I'm an Azure MVP as well as a Microsoft 365 MVP. And I started working with the cloud back in 2008, and that made me one of the experts who tried to solve cloud problems or cloud requirements upfront before anyone else thought about moving data into the cloud and so on. I'm also a Microsoft Regional Director, and that means that in my position, I could talk also about what is a global strategy in finding new solutions for cloud services and so on. But on the other side, I'm not a Microsoft employee. And I own my own company. We founded ourselves a long time ago, and we are focusing on developing solutions and also in consulting services in the space of Microsoft Azure, cloud services, and also in the modern workplace, which is Microsoft 365. And that made me investigating into a lot of governance discussions, and this is the topic today. We are talking about identity governance for Microsoft Azure, because what I saw here is out of a security space, many people very often think that security comes by default through cloud services, which isn't the case in any situation. In a lot of situations, you are totally covered by Microsoft or by the cloud provider you are doing here. But there are specific spaces where we need to look into governance processes around Azure Active Directory. So first of all, what I want to show you today is we will look at what is governance, what does Azure Active Directory identity governance look like, and also then we will see how we can secure solutions within Azure and also how we can monitor our solutions afterwards. So first of all, why do we need governance at all? And this is kind of an ongoing question, because governance is an ongoing process in cloud services. Why is that the case? Because cloud services are, for me, evergreen services. So there are a lot of things coming into cloud services. For instance, there could be monthly updates within Microsoft 365. There are tons of new previews which are coming to Azure all day, every day, and so on. And the features are changing by themselves during the months, because we are on a learning journey. We are not in a know-all community anymore. We are in a learn-all community all around. And we need to develop governance principles which help us to stay current in our security settings and also to stay up to date with any policy we make here. The second topic, what I will show you, and this is a live demo, is what comes out of the box in Azure Active Directory identity governance. And the last topic would be how can we manage out of the box, out of a security scope, everything out of Azure Active Directory. Why I'm so interested in Azure Active Directory is because for me, if you can't sign into your solution wouldn't work. And this is one of the main topics you have to think about if you develop something. If you use Azure Active Directory as an identity provider, you need to make sure that the identity is protected, that you have a life cycle in place, and also that you have an ongoing process looking after your identities. And identities include your identities within your organization, but also identities which are, for instance, guest accounts. So you need to monitor and secure those identities. To give you first a practical example out of the security space is, it's still ongoing that 89% of all security incidents happens due to leaked credentials. And that means you can prevent that very easily by turning MFA on, for instance. And MFA is a second factor which secures your identity. And that means if you sign into your application within Azure Active Directory, you have to validate that with a second factor. And this is so easy currently because you can go passwordless, for instance. So you can use a passwordless sign-in just with your mobile device and sign into your applications anytime you want. So let's talk first about our governance lifecycle. First of all, if you look at governance, you have to define what policies do I need in my environment. So first of all, we speak with a team, we set up a team, the team needs support from your stakeholders, and you need to identify your key policies for governance, security, and compliance. On the other side, don't forget the users. Always think about, you want the simple user process that the users understand why they are doing that. Security is very often not an easy task for a user. They probably don't understand why they should enable MFA on their side. And on the other side, it's really important that they understand the why. The second topic is we need to configure the features, and we also need to look into the features and how they work. So that means, for instance, you want to enable a feature which means we want to share meeting policies, or we want to have a feature in place where someone has an access review in place. Think about use cases like that. And the last point is, you can't measure what you can't monitor. So that means you also need a strong report and auditing mechanism in place, which means you can either build your own solution with Microsoft Graph and create functionality out of that, or you can also use the built-in functionality which comes within the Azure Active Directory audit log and anything else. So that means the last part of the section would be, I will show you how the security graph works and also what secure score in Azure Active Directory means. And the next topic is, what roles do I need? Very often when I talk with customers in the beginning, they say, I don't know what to do. There's my IT team. They do everything. They're responsible for anything. But on the other side, we are in a modern environment, and that means we have business requirements. And that means the business needs to be protected. For instance, on an information governance place, or with their data, you need data classification in place or anything else. Then you have the IT operations team, and the target of the IT operations team is to have a smooth experience in operations. That means secure environment, everything is current, no troubles with machines, no troubles with clients, no troubles with the cloud, anything around that. And also, then you have, from a security and compliance perspective, you have your security officers, and the security officers say, okay, I need to prevent data leaks and data breaches. And also, I need to protect high-value information. And this is where governance comes in place, where you start talking about data classification, sensitivity labels, trainable classifiers, insider risks, communication compliance, things like that. And also, on the other side, we talk about incident management. Because we are in complicated environments, we also have to talk with legal and IT. And that means from a legal perspective, they come up with, we need to keep our data, we need to have retention policies in place, we need to have cases where we can see what happened in in an incident, who leaked the data, and so on. And last but not least is always the user, the employee who says, I need to do my work, I trust IT, I trust security, and I trust my business that they know what I should do, that I'm working within a safe environment. And this is always one of the key points we need to look here. From an identity management perspective, we have, first of all, we have different responsibilities in place, and I will show you what I mean with that. That means from a responsibility place, you need to define your roles, and the roles means who has access to the certain scenarios. That means you need also to validate who has access to my teams, my groups, my applications, and so on. And then from a lifecycle perspective, which is a huge topic within governance, anytime you need to have a good lifecycle policy in place. That means what happens if a new user comes to your organization? What happens if the user leaves your organization on the other side? And also, what are you doing if you have a takeover of a user? So that means a user is moving from one department to another department, or on the other side, it could also mean what happens if a data breach happened already in a user account. And then also you have lifecycle topics like what happens if a user was deleted? Can I restore the user? What kind of data can I restore? And what are the responsibilities behind that? So always think about data lifecycle, identity lifecycle, and also application lifecycle. And then we need to set up an privileged access management system. Like, for instance, we are defining privileged roles in our environment. We are within Azure Active Directory, and then we can set up, okay, Martina needs to have privileged access to her environment, and that means with privileged access, she can promote herself to be an administrator for 2 hours, for 4 hours, for 8 hours, and then the privileges were removed out of her role. So you see, there are different concepts in place. If you're talking about identity governance, always ask yourself some key questions. So that means we need to reduce the access of users to resources. Every user should only have access to those resources which they are responsible for. Also, think about what kind of access do the user need. Does it mean the user is an administrator? Does it mean he has read access? Or does it mean he manages his own applications? Also, think about what kind of organizational controls do we have to manage this kind of access? And also, do we have an auditing system in place that your auditors can verify the controls and if they are working? That being said, before I look at the identity lifecycle, I will move into a short demonstration that we walk through our environment. As you see, I'm here signed in portalazure.com. First of all, I just started here, and what you see from an identity perspective, I have there several services in place. So first of all, I have Azure Active Directory in place, and then I have identity governance. From a security perspective for governance, I will first look at my identity governance functionality and what controls do I have here available. And to direct you here, so for instance, what you see here is I can start with my identity governance, and you see here I'm starting with a pillar which means users. Just to show you here, I have here my users, Then I have an external user lifecycle. I have my group membership, I have role assignments, and here I have auditing and reporting. What do I see here? If I'm totally new in identity governance and I do not know what kind of use cases I need to cover and so on, you see here I can choose between different recommendations and common use cases. So for instance, I can control my external user lifecycle. I can manage group memberships. I can protect resources with role assignments, or I can audit and create reports. What we want to do first is we want to look at certain identity governance pillars. So a very common question I get all the time is, if I invite a guest to my Microsoft 365 tenant, I want that the guest needs to read and use our terms of use. Can I do that from a central perspective? The answer is here in identity governance. I have here a specific pillar which is called terms of use. And here you see I can set up new terms and say terms or code of conduct for Contoso without the typo. And what you see here, you can upload your own document. Very often those documents come out of a legal department. Then you can set up specific languages for that. And that means if a user signs into your environment, he gets his language and can get familiar with the code of conduct scenarios which are outlined by your department. And you can also add the display name. The other thing, what you can do here is you can say, okay, the user needs to actually read the terms of use. You know, very often you are in a hurry, you need to sign in somewhere, you do not have enough time, but that means you can require your users to expand the terms of use. The other thing is you can also use us to consent to on every device. And that means this is already kind of a security measurement, because that means if Martina signs in on different machines, on her mobile device, on her iPad, on her Windows device, she needs to consent on every device to the terms of use. And also, you can also set up a consent expiration policy. It could be that you work in a regulated industry, like you're in government, in a public sector, or you are working at the bank or anything else. Then you need to consent twice a year, every quarter, every month, anything else. What I very often recommend to my customers is that they require the consent anytime when the policy changes. So you see, you can create terms of use and then require consent for your users. The other thing I want to highlight here is in identity governance is the settings around access reviews. Why would I need access reviews? So first of all, think about you have managed your Microsoft Teams, your groups, your applications within Azure Active Directory, but you want to delegate the permissions to external for external guests to the Teams owner, to the group's owner, and so on. And that means in that case, you can set up an access review. Just to show you how an access review looks like. So first of all, I'm selecting what kind of review do I want here. So it could be Microsoft Teams, it could be Microsoft 365 groups. It could also be an application. And that's the beauty around Azure Active Directory, because it covers all your enterprise applications which are connected to Azure Active Directory. In my case, I'm going through the teams and groups scenario, and here you see I want to have an access review for every guest who is guest in specific Microsoft Teams, or is a guest within Microsoft 365 groups. And here you see, I can say, okay, this is for my groups with guest users. The scope of that is guest users only. Also, what is kind of important out of a practical experience, you can here create the scope of what groups am I looking for. And that means currently I'm looking at all my teams and all my groups, but you can also exclude specific groups where I say, okay, if those groups are still protected in any way and do not have any guests, so I do not need that access review for them. Also, what you see here is inactivity, activity of users. So for instance, if you have inactive users in your tenant, then you can look at those users as well. And what defines an inactive user? An inactive user is a person who hasn't signed into Azure Active Directory for, say, 30 days, or you can also say it's 60 days. And that means this kind of functionality also creates kind of an out-of-the-box cleanup process for your identity scenarios. So say, okay, I want to look at my inactive users, then I check for my reviewers. What I can do here is I can create a multi-stage review. What does that mean? If I check this, then I say first reviewer is the owner of the team, and the second reviewer would be someone from another department or specific users out of the IT department or the manager of the user. So you see, you can also implement a workflow review process there to avoid that guests are removed out of your teams, which you still need there. Currently, in my case, I stay with single stage because I trust my users, and I said I want a review process for my group owners. So that means my group owners will get a notification, which means there are several guests in your tenant, and they need to have the review weekly because it's a demonstration. I do that weekly. Normal cadence would be make it monthly or quarterly or twice a year or yearly. So it depends what kind of cadence you want here. We start today, and you see also you can start it, you can define an end date. An end date is always a good idea because you don't know, you're changing roles or anything else happens, or you need to redefine the policy. So you can also say, okay, we end after 12 years or 12 weeks in that case. Next, we go into the settings, and that means if we have those additional settings here, if the reviewer doesn't respond to the access review, because this is something which requires also more security or more environmental changes. That means, for instance, if the reviewer doesn't respond because he got the email and he thought it's a spam message and he doesn't know what to do, he doesn't have adoption and change management, he didn't get training, and he doesn't respond on the access review, you can decide here what happens here. And this is also quite important because if the owner of the team doesn't reply or doesn't change anything, you can decide the guest stays in the team, the guest will be removed out of the team, or we will take the recommended actions, because also after access reviews behind the scenes, there's an AI working. AI is working everywhere behind that. And that means the AI is looking for recommendations about the user behavior. If they see this user specifically hasn't signed in very often, or he has no interaction in the team or anything else, he would recommend to either remove or approve the access. And then You can also say, decide here if you need any decision helpers. So that means the user hasn't signed in for the last 30 days, or the user hasn't done anything in the group for the last days. The next topic here is out of an audit perspective, which is kind of important because I also talked about governance, and governance always includes auditing and reporting and monitoring. You can set up here, we need a justification, we need reminders, and we also get the notifications via email. And then we go here, say, okay, this is my guest access review. We can fill in a description so that it doesn't feel like a spam email. And then you see here, this are your criteria you have here. What is the cadence? What are you doing here? And then you have your access review and can create it. Gladly, I already created that guest access review, and I will now briefly show you how that looks like from an user perspective. That means I'm currently signed in as an admin user, and now I'm signing in as Adele, which is a group owner and who needs to have access review in place. So Adele starts her day by signing in into portalazure.com, and first of all what she does is she's checking her emails. And that means from an email perspective, you see here, she gets an information today, action requirement, please review your group access. And then you see here, the Contoso organization requests me that I approve my review. I go here and say, okay, I want to review my access. What happens here? You can look in here what you have done here and also the requested history. And that means in her case, she needs to look into the group access permissions. Check here. What you see here, she already approved that. So she has nothing to review. But normally what you would see here is that she has a specific access review, which she can confirm or deny. That means you see here out of the box, it's really easy to have access reviews in place. The next topic I want to talk here is from a governance perspective is privileged identity management. What does privileged identity management mean in that case? Privileged identity management is enabled in your organization for specific users who need elevated privileges to work within the tenant. And that means what you can do here is, for instance, Martina needs access to be a global administrator, but not 24 hours a day, only for 4 hours a day. And in that case, you can set up privileged identity management for her to work in a secure and easy way. So what you can do here is you can first look at specific roles in your environment. And then what you can look here from a role perspective here, you can say, okay, I want to assign the eligibility. And what you see here is all the roles which are available within Azure Active Directory. What you see here is it could be very granular administrative roles for specific needs. So for instance, look here, we have application developer roles, and those roles can create application registrations independent of the user can register applications. So that means you can delegate permissions for those roles and say, okay, if I have people in my organization who are responsible for applications, they can activate their roles for a certain amount of time or for specific users in your organization. What I want to look at is at the security roles. And for instance, I want to assign the security administrator role to specific people in my organization. What you see here, I have no assignments in place. First of all, before I assign anything to a person, I can also look at the settings for the security administrator role. You see here, those are the default settings. So one of the main things is how long can I activate my current role? And here you see it's 8 hours, it's the default setting. You also see if the user activates and he has an Azure MFA already in place, I require them to have an Azure MFA request in place. You also see I can write a justification on activation and so on. So you can see you have very granular controls. So for instance, I say, okay, I want to provide that role to Adele, but she doesn't need it for 8 hours. So that means in that case, I can change this role assignments and can say, okay, I do not need 8 hours for her. I need 4 hours. Half a day, it's quite enough to do her security tasks and so on. What you see here, then I say, okay, I want to have Azure MFA in place, or I can also use a conditional access policy to secure her requirements. Also, you see here, when I design the role, I can say, okay, the person who uses privileged identity management will have a justification for activation. You can also do more granular controls. For instance, if you're a large organization, you can also say, I need the ticket information so that a ticket is generated which shows that Adele has the role assigned to her. Or I can also do an approval for those roles. The approval is kind of a point you need to think first, because approval means additional time. So if you have emergency accounts in place who need to sign in very fast or very quick into the tenant, you always need to think about, do I really need an approval process? Because the activation of those roles is done automatically. It's very easy to do them, and you have it in your audit log in any case. So I'm updating that for 4 hours. You see here the role is updated now, and then I can add assignment. And here you see I can assign those membership assignments to specific groups if I want that. And I can say, okay, what kind of members do I want to select? I'm currently assigning that to Adele, as I already said. So I see here my user list and say, okay, Adele will be a user administrator as well. Next. And here you see she can set it up and be eligible, and then I assign the role to her. The other thing is what is really important here, if I update that, look at that, what I can do here is I made the setting that Adele is permanently eligible to create, to be a security administrator. But think about use cases where you have external vendors which need to have access into your tenant. Then you can also have contract date assignments set up in the privilege process as well. And that makes it easier for you to have those situations in place. Also, what you can do here in the role settings, again, you can change them afterwards if you want that. And also you can look at those role assignments in any case after you have done that. So normally, and we will look if that works already, if Adele now starts her day and says, okay, I need to check something in security and I want to promote myself. Currently, Adele is still a normal user. We will look if it already is true that she can use privileged identity management. So she signs into privileged identity management. And here she has the same screen as we had before. And here she can go to activate just in time. Let's look here. You see, there's her role. She can go into the security administrator role, and the next thing she will do here is she needs to activate the role. So she clicks on activate. Again, you see here, she can also say, okay, I can activate it for a custom amount of time or anything else. And here you see, that's the first point. Adele doesn't have MFA yet. So the system checks first. She needs to verify with MFA first before she can activate her role. The other thing is she can also select the duration of her role here, and she can say, okay, I do not need that for 4 hours. I only want that for 2 hours or anything else. And here she writes in her validation request, and then she activates her privileged role just in time. Okay? So that's the example or the live demo around what kind of roles do I need and how can I do that. The next topic around identity governance in the next couple of minutes I want to show you is how it looks like out of an Azure Active Directory scope. Because first of all, we looked at terms of use. The second topic around lifecycle management was identity governance. Then we looked at privileged identity management, and another point out of identity governance, which I showed you here, is Azure Active Directory logs roles, and also at Azure Resources. Also with Azure Resources, you have the same scope. You can do privileged identity management for your Azure resources as well. And that means you work with user roles, or you do whatever you want here, and then you can assign roles to specific resources in your Azure, in your Azure resources scope. So back to identity governance. The last point I wanted to show you here is that you can also walk through some use cases in external user lifecycle. So for instance, you can say, okay, I can remove guests with unnecessary access or anything else, or I can also look at my lifecycle workflows. What does it mean? I can go into creating a workflow, and here you can see you can use predefined workflows for your basic tasks out of identity management. And one of that would be new hire employees. So I can look at that workflow. You see here, I'm onboarding new employees. And then you can configure that workflow type. What happens if a new hire comes into the organization? What am I doing here? What kind of configuration tasks do I have to do? That being said, back for the last couple of minutes to my Azure Active Directory. What I showed you here is we saw a lot in audit logs. And this is the monitoring part. From the monitoring part, you see here, what have I done during the last 30 minutes? You see here, I configured PIM. I changed members to PIM. You see here also in my audit log, what have I done? Because currently I'm working as the administrator. I have assigned the security administrator role to Adele and so on. So you see what happened to my directory scope. And that means you can also always look at those audit logs to get in detail reports for your environment. Last but not least, because it should also give you an additional level of security, I want to highlight in Azure Active Directory the security pillar. If I'm here, what I can look there is I can look at my risky users. So for instance, what you see, I have two users, Adele and my administrator. They are currently at risk because Adele hasn't set up her MFA yet. The administrator signs in from Las Vegas, Vienna, Antwerp, and from various locations. So you see here, those users will be highlighted as well. And that means if you look at that risky sign-in users, you can also define specific policies for them. For instance, look at the risky sign-ins or at risky detections. Then from a security scope, you can simply look at those risky users and look at the events. Also think about, okay, there is nothing happening. So you can always create the scope and define the detection time. And here what you see, Adele, she was in Las Vegas 1 week ago. That's true, she was. And now you see here on a couple of days earlier, she signed in from Vienna. And that means the detection type in that case is she's moving back and forth between new countries and new regions, and that would trigger an alert. And that means you can use that kind of risky user reporting to see what happens in your environment and what kind of users you have here. The last thing, what I want to highlight is if you look into identity, please start looking in your identity secure score. You see here, my demo tenant has a very low identity secure score. It's 60.5%. You see also here in comparison, compared to the same company size, I'm far below with my identity security. The beauty here is you can look at certain improvement actions and walk through those improvement actions, and those improvement actions would also help you to get a better score in your identity security. And that means these are predefined tasks you can easily use every day to improve your security in Azure Active Directory. That being said, I'm now briefly wrapping up what I showed you today. Just going back to my slides. What I showed you today is, first of all, we looked at Azure Active Directory identity governance. I showed you how you can use predefined workflows in there. We also looked at access reviews. We did set up privileged identity management. We looked at the terms of use. We also have some toolkits provided for you on the GitHub of my colleague, where you can see how you can secure your apps with Azure Active Directory. And that being said, hopefully you learned something new. You see that Azure Active Directory is really important, and it's easy to set it up with out-of-the-box tools. Hope you liked the session, and I hope to see you at the next Global Azure event next year. Probably we see each other in person at one of the next events. Thank you, and heading back to questions.